All right, and welcome once again to another edition of the Atheist Hour. My name is Gene Cook, and you may have noticed that it's not Sunday night. We have been doing the Atheist Hour webcast on Sunday night since we started it back in November, but tonight is Tuesday night, and that's because I'm going to be tied up on Sunday nights for the next few months at least. And so from now on, we're going to be, well, let me say, until further notice, we're going to be having the Atheist Hour at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is 8 p.m. on the East Coast. And then we're going to continue to have the Narrow Mind program at 6 p.m. And so tonight's program will last for an hour, and then we'll go right into the Narrow Mind. As you heard at the top of the show, our phone number is toll-free 1-800-466-1873. And I'd like to introduce to you our guest tonight. Our guest is Professor Ray Wallard, and he lives in the Detroit, Michigan area, if I'm not mistaken. Professor Wallard, welcome to the Atheist Hour.
Hello, Pastor Cook.
It's good to have you with us tonight. Maybe you can tell us, can you tell us what schools, I know there's more than one, that you actually teach at, and what subjects you teach?
I'm currently teaching at 3 here in Detroit. Wayne State University is one of them, where I teach Africana Studies. The particular course I'm teaching is the history of black social and political thought. Also teach at a couple of community colleges here. At both of them, I teach English, English language and literature.
All right, and you've also had some experience, if I'm not mistaken, in teaching in the areas of philosophy and logic. Yeah,
in the past, I've taught both general philosophy courses and I've taught logic. I was a philosophy minor and English major as an undergraduate. And as a graduate student, I went to a particularly theoretical school, which I'm very, very happy about and proud of, Cornell University. Which, even though I was an English major, it is just incumbent upon you as a student at Cornell in their PhD program that you also branch out into linguistics, history, philosophy, and that sort of thing. So it's pretty challenging, but I'm glad I did it.
Okay, now this is the first time you and I have had a chance to speak over the phone, and I was referred to you by a mutual friend of ours, Anton Beatty, who I presume was a former student of yours.
Yes, indeed. One of my brightest students, and I now consider him a very close and a dear friend.
Good.
I have to say I learn from him almost every time I talk to him. So.
Yeah, actually, I've had him on the program before too, and he was pretty knowledgeable about his unbelief and able to defend his position rather well. Let me ask you a question about your atheism. I'm assuming that you do consider yourself an atheist.
No, I don't.
You don't?
I actually consider myself to be an agnostic.
Okay.
I usually don't even bother to mention that because I'm so often stereotyped as an atheist, and I think that people are socially conditioned to see things that way. You're either religious or you're atheistic, and I'm not. I'm agnostic. Agnosticism is the belief that it is not possible for us as human beings to either confirm or deny the existence of a personal God, a creator. And in fact, I would take that even further myself, and I'd say I don't think that we have the capacity to even conceive or understand the concept of a God. So in other words, I don't deny the possibility of the existence of a God. I just don't think that it's anything that I could ever conclusively assume.
And what led you to that conclusion?
Common sense first of all. When I was very young, 14 years old, I was raised a Southern Baptist here in Detroit. I was very young, and I just sort of, through common sense, arrived at the conclusion that my participating in the religious rituals of my church was sort of irrational. I saw no evidence to justify the degree of hypocrisy that I encountered, which I think is fairly common in all religious practices, if not in religious idealism, in the reality of how those who profess faith in various theologies, how they behave, I saw a lot of hypocrisy. And I objected to that hypocrisy, and the response that I got from adults was that the hypocrisy was actually a reflection of the divinely inspired Word of God, meaning the Bible. And I arrived at the rational conclusion that everything I saw happening around me was based on interpretation, the interpretation of a supposedly divinely inspired text. Mm-hmm. I concluded that there was no reason for me to continue to participate in that, but that, in fact, I ought to study that text myself and various other texts. I ought to gather as much information as possible. And at that point, I became an agnostic. Though I didn't know at that point what an agnostic was, mm-hmm. I became one. And I announced to the church that I was leaving because I felt that I didn't accuse them actually of hypocrisy, but I did say that I felt that it was irrational to continue my participation in the church. And had a sort of an unfortunate experience because the congregation felt that I was possessed, and they felt that they needed to exorcise the demons from me. And so I was sort of forced to undergo a rather primitive exorcism ritual.
Wow.
In the basement of the church. My father rescued me from this, actually. He came in, he found out what was going on. He came in and he took me out of there, and he told me that I did not have to go to church anymore if I didn't want to. And in fact, I have not been a believer since then, since the age of 14.
Okay. So it was your mom that was more involved than your father was?
Yes, my father wasn't involved at all.
Okay.
And I believe at this point that my father was probably agnostic himself, though he never labeled himself that way.
Right. Now I agree with you wholeheartedly that there are hypocrites in not only the church, the Christian church, but there's hypocrites everywhere. In fact, at this very moment, Ray Wallard, you are speaking to a hypocrite. And I don't say that proudly. I say that ashamedly. And that I say that because I don't always act as I know I should, or even as I teach others. And but for me, unlike the conclusions that you were led to, for me that becomes more of a confirmation of the truth of God's word as I believe it's found in the Bible, because this is exactly what the Bible tells me I should expect. For example, in Romans chapter 7, Paul, the apostle, who maybe somebody from the outside looking in would think of all Christians, this guy should lead the most exemplary Christian life. But in fact, we find him in his own writings talking about his struggle with sin, talking about his inability to perform those things that he knows that he ought to do, and then his inability to keep from doing certain sins that he knows that he shouldn't do. So for me, I guess I was kind of drawn to the opposite conclusions, although I wasn't raised in the church like you were. I didn't become a Christian until I was 26 years of age. But you said something that kind of sparked my curiosity. You said that you had came to the point where you had come to the conclusion that it would be impossible to prove that there was a God, or to have some type of evidence that there was a God.
Well, I am at that point in my life right now as an intellectual. But when I was 14, I didn't assume that I couldn't prove the existence of God. And in fact, I felt that I ought to try to do that. I ought to try to gather as much evidence or information as I could about the nature of the universe in general, not just in terms of the existence of God, but basic forces, such as gravity, electromagnetism, light, that sort of thing. I wanted to understand how things worked. I began to study the sciences and became very interested in literature. I started to read very widely. My religious background had prevented me from doing that up to that point. There was a suspicion of too wide reading. My family has always valued education, of course. I mean, you can probably tell that from talking to me. From what you know of me, and this is very true of most African-American families that I'm aware of. It's an aspect of African-American culture, especially from the early 20th century. And my family is very rooted in the early 20th century. So education wasn't the problem, but there was just sort of a bar on certain kinds of reading. I knew that there were parameters I shouldn't go beyond because of my religious upbringing. We were referred to, I don't know if you know about this, Pastor Cook, but there's something called the Sanctified Church, which is an aspect, a sect within Southern Baptism. And that's what my family was.
Okay, so when they
Sanctified Baptists were sort of suspicious of the outside world, technology and science in particular. I overcame that. And I would just say in your defense, Pastor Cook, that even when I was 14, it wasn't the hypocrisy of individual people that bothered me, because I just see that as human. It didn't bother me that much. What bothered me, and it still does, but it's my critique of religion, as a matter of fact, is that organized religion, people in groups, when they gather together, the hypocrisy becomes programmatic. It becomes a principle of action, and groups of people behave in ways that are very destructive. And of course, examples of that are the Crusades, the Inquisition, what's happening in our country at this point, a return to so-called fundamentalist Christian values that is very destructive and very anti-human, racist, sexist, homophobic. Those are the sorts of things that bother me. I don't think that this is necessarily a manifestation of a weakness, a basic weakness in human nature. In fact, I don't think there is any such thing as human nature. I think that most of what we are is cultural, not natural. That's one of the hallmarks of being human. We, unique among all the other animals, we build fires. We create technology. We change the natural world to suit ourselves. And so I don't think that there is necessarily any such thing as human nature, but I do believe that institutions can be evil and that the things that they do can have evil results. That's my critique of Christianity, in fact.
Well, that may certainly be true. I'm not sure if we could make a generalization of all Christians fitting into that category. And I'm not sure as a Christian I would want to do that any more than an atheist would want me to make some type of general characterization of atheism and those who believe in atheism. I think.
But then, I would make the point that an atheist and a Christian are one and the same thing, which is why I'm not atheist. I don't believe that an atheist actually is in a position in which he or she can make certain claims such as that. An atheist, an atheist, is just the other side of the coin of a believer. You probably have heard that term, that the opposite, or that saying, the opposite of hatred, or rather the opposite of love, the opposite, I just did what President Bush does all the time. I said the punchline first. Okay. The opposite of love is not hatred, but indifference. And so to be atheistic, at least in my experience, in my reading and in my analysis of the situation, to be atheistic is to be just as captured by the concept of belief as the theistic mind that the atheist supposedly is against. So both are relations of belief, relations of being captured or contained by an idea or a concept. To be against something is to give energy to that thing. And I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic.
But you certainly have a belief system. I mean, you're against the idea or the concept that the truth of God can be known.
No, I'm not against that.
Well, you said that it's impossible. You said it's impossible that we could know for sure.
I'm professing a belief.
Well, you are professing
I think I just simply recognize the reality, and I think it is a demonstrable reality. It's rational that we cannot, as human beings, confirm or deny the existence of God. There may indeed be a God. It may be a personal God. It may be the God of the Old Testament, as far as I know. I don't exclude that possibility. There may be a heaven, there may be a hell.
But see, that's a belief. When you say that you don't believe that you can confirm or deny the existence of God, in effect, you're making a belief statement. You're believing something about the nature of reality that prevents us from having any concrete evidence one way or the other.
Well, that's true only in the sense that ultimately all of our thoughts, all thought processes can be boiled down to the concept of belief. But it's a particular kind of meaning of the word belief that you're pursuing there, and I don't necessarily follow you in that pursuit. I'm simply saying, I'll say again, I think that this is very rational, and I am speaking out of the rational tradition. I believe that one either recognizes or denies material realities. For instance, my hand has 4 fingers and a thumb. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that my hand has 4 fingers and a thumb. Now, of course, what you're pointing out is that ultimately I do, because ultimately I can't really confirm that my hand is there at all. I have faith, in a sense, that the visual, the sense manifestation of whatever is there that I call my hand actually is there. But I'm not speaking of belief in that sort of very extreme way. I'm saying that I know, at least provisionally, and I'm not believing it, I'm just simply acknowledging it, the evidence of my senses, that my hand has a thumb and 4 fingers. I could lose one of those fingers, but I'm not going to grow a new one. You see what I'm saying? That's not a belief.
Right.
It's a rational acknowledgement of the nature of my hand, as far as I know.
Based on previous observation.
Yes, and everything that I know about human anatomy.
Okay. All right, let me give out our phone number once again. Our phone number is 1-800-466-1873. We are taking your calls live tonight. If you'd like to speak to either myself or Professor Waller, we would encourage you to call in. You made a comment just a few moments ago when you were critiquing Christianity. You spoke of hypocrisy as it kind of played itself out in the Crusades in the Inquisition.
Mm-hmm. And I also mentioned the fundamentalist Christian anti-human movements of the American culture at this point in our history.
The anti-human movement.
Yeah, anti-humanist, yes.
Okay.
I see a lot of the so-called, and I do say so-called because I don't believe that this reflects all fundamental Christian thought, but there is a very powerful political bloc, an economic force at work in our country right now, which is very reactionary, mm-hmm. very anti-humanist and anti-human. And
well,
the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, those social forces is something that I reject.
Yeah, that's probably a subject for another program. And that gets into political philosophies. And the question is, are they anti-humanist or are they anti-socialist or anti-communist?
Yeah, which we could discuss, but I'm just simply saying that I believe that they ought to be included along with the Catholic Church, because the Crusades and the Inquisition are primarily, historically speaking, the activities of the Catholic Church. And I belong to the Protestant tradition in terms of my upbringing and my childhood. And the Protestants want to try to separate themselves quite often from the activities, the actions, the historical actions of the Catholic Church. But the Protestants, I believe, are just as guilty of evil intention and evil action as the Catholics. So Catholics and Protestants are Christians, both groups. Now, ultimately, I don't think that they're following the precepts or the teachings of Christ.
Well,
I have nothing against Christ.
Right. That would be the major question right there. If Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself," then that kind of seems to be the end of the end of the issue right there. What for you, when you use the term evil, is evil a subjective concept for you?
No. It's interesting. I spent a lot of time when I was younger as a philosophy student discussing in abstract terms the nature of evil. It's one of the major areas of philosophic investigation. What is the nature of evil? What is it? Why is it there? How can it be overcome? Is it possible to overcome it? That sort of thing. But the interesting thing about those studies and those discussions I went through is I had very good mentors and very good teachers. My teachers were very humane and very good people. And so I was very lucky in the sense that I was always led away from the abstractions ultimately to core ideas. And so ultimately I don't think that there's really anything to discuss. It's very easy to define evil. Evil is that which we perpetuate, do, acts that we commit that bring pain and suffering to others. I would also say that we should extend that to include pain and suffering that one brings upon oneself. And so to inflict pain and suffering upon oneself is also evil. Upon someone who does not want your abusive treatment, to do that is evil. To abuse oneself also is evil. So anything that causes human pain and suffering is evil.
So like a dentist drill would be evil.
for very obvious reasons. It's not evil for me to clip my toenails or to clip my fingernails. Every time I do so, I murder billions of cells that are still alive in my body. Mm-hmm. And so I am inflicting pain in a sense. I would also carry that forward to the concept of the murder of animals for the consumption of, food, sustenance.
So
I think to a certain extent, it is just natural for us to do that because larger animals prey on smaller animals. That's not necessarily an evil act to kill an animal and consume that animal. However, it becomes evil at the point where it is no longer necessary to sustain one's life. One does it to excess. One does it in a systematic and in an abusive and an inhuman way. And so, of course, what I'm saying is anyone who's not a vegetarian in our modern society is committing or participating in an act of evil because, our commercial, corporatized food system does indeed unnecessarily inflict pain and suffering on animals.
So you're a vegetarian?
No, I'm not. I'm a lot like you. I'm a hypocrite.
A self-professed hypocrite at that.
Yes. I'm wrestling with that, too.
I mean, why wouldn't you just stop eating meat?
I think I eventually will.
So you would classify yourself then as an evil person?
Yes.
Wow. Yes. Interesting.
Well, I'm an agnostic. One of the things that you do as an agnostic is you acknowledge your own weaknesses, your own hypocrisy, your own humanity, and you try to become a better person, and for very rational reasons. Because to the extent that you try to be a better person, you have a reason, you have a justification to demand that other people treat you correctly. We don't have a rational right to demand that we be treated humanely if we ourselves commit inhumane acts.
So in your understanding of the way the world is, would you say that all human beings are to some degree evil?
Yes, I think so. And, I think that's the answer to that question, that the existence of evil is explained by the existence of desire. Human beings are not like rocks or they're not like trees. They're not like blades of grass. We have desire. We have both what I would call animal desires, the desire to procreate, the desire to consume food, to drink water, the desire to sleep, the desire for comfort. And we also have abstract desires, the desire for compensation for our work, the desire for recognition, the desire for status, for power. And so because of desire, there has to be the existence of evil, because desire means that we will inevitably come into conflict with each other and with ourselves because of the drive to gain things, to do things, to dominate the world around us, to control our own environment.
Well, if all that's true, I'm wondering then why did you bring up the Roman Catholic Inquisitions? I mean, it seems to me that they were only playing out your philosophy of reality.
Well, no, because I'm not so simple-minded as to argue that we're automatons. The fact that we have will and that we have desire doesn't mean that we're at the mercy of those things. Rationalism says that we're able to rationally decide that we ought not to consume more than we need. We ought not to bring undue or unnecessary, inflict unnecessary suffering on others, because we can see rationally through the study of history, through the study of human interaction, that when you commit acts of violence, you're creating the possibility, the inevitability that acts of violence will be committed against you. I think that the rational tradition teaches that. And so we have examples of people like Einstein, who was very much against war, against violence, against the use of nuclear weapons, although he cautioned the president at the time that it was possible for nuclear weapons to be constructed. He warned the president of the United States that Germany was probably working on an atomic bomb. He didn't advocate that the United States build one. What he wanted was to spread knowledge, and his hope was, it's a rational hope, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, that the more knowledge one has, the more one will be led rationally to behave fashion. I think it is the province of religious belief, in fact, to be irrational, to think that because you have a divinely inspired entitlement to the true wishes of a so-called personal God, that one is able to inflict pain and suffering, one is able to be an inhumane and abusive person, and that you're acting out the will of God, and that you'll be protected. That
well, I don't know any
forces
Christians,
of rationality and history will not punish you for your behavior.
I don't know any Christians that believe that that's in fact what the Scriptures teach.
No, I don't know personally because I don't know Pat Robertson. I don't know any Christians either on an individual level. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't look at Christians or Buddhists or any religious tradition, Muslims, as individuals when I critique these religious beliefs. I look at them as institutions or as social forces.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Our number is 1-800-466-1873. And my guest tonight is Professor Waller. We're going to go to the calls when we get back. Once again, our phone number, 1-800-466-1873. All right, folks, there you go. All right, and we're back. You're listening to the Atheist Hour exclusively on Unchained Radio. My guest tonight is Professor Ray Wallard, and we've got several calls waiting, so let's go to our callers. Let's go first to Dustin calling from Greensboro, North Carolina. Dustin, welcome once again to the Atheist Hour.
Good evening, gentlemen. Hello. I can barely hear you.
Okay. Who said I can barely hear you?
I did.
Okay. Professor Waller, can you hear Dustin?
Yeah, I hear him just fine.
Okay, but you can barely hear me?
Yeah.
Huh. All right. Well, we'll work on that.
Okay.
Go ahead and say what's on your mind.
Just, Professor Waller, good evening. It's good to have you. Good to have you on the show. Enjoyed listening to you. I was taking some notes here, and I believe
Justin is fading.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but you had said that it's not possible to confirm or deny the existence of a personal creator, and then you went on further to say that we don't have the capacity to comprehend the God. And is that true? Is that correct? Did I represent what you said correctly?
That pretty much sums up what I said, yes.
Yeah, I can't hear anything he's saying.
Pastor Cook.
Yeah.
You can hear me?
I can hear you fine. So you
I
can't
hear
him,
just
Dustin?
fine, but Justin
okay, now
has faded quite a bit.
All right, I apologize for the technical difficulty. I'm not sure exactly. So, Professor Waller, you couldn't hear Dustin, or you could hear him okay?
Yes, I can't hear him now.
Okay, well, what...
Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. I can hear interference.
Yeah, I can hear some interference, too. I'm not sure where that's coming from.
I can go ahead and pose my question and then get off the air if I need to.
Okay, go ahead and do that. Can you hear him okay, Professor Waller?
Just barely, but I can hear him.
Okay.
Go ahead and pose your question, Dustin.
Yeah. My understanding was that not only is Professor Waller an agnostic, says it's not possible to confirm or deny the existence of a personal creator, but we also don't have the capacity to comprehend a God. And if that's true, then how do I know that I can know that I have this capacity? In other words, how do I know that I have the capacity to know that we can't know a God? How do I make a positive assertion about the most ultimate issue that faces man when that very assertion rests upon a largely unknowability or a large inability to know that which I say that I'm making a positive assertion about? In other words, it seems to be a self-contradictory worldview because the claim here seems to make no assertion about ultimate reality, but yet it rests upon a most comprehensive assertion about that ultimate reality. So that's pretty much just the question I had. It seems to be self-contradictory from the get-go, but I appreciate you taking my call, and I'll take my answer off the air.
Thank you, Dustin.
Okay. Well, that's a common logical error that he just made. He's committing a reductio ad absurdum, which means reduction to absurdity. He's taking fairly straightforward and simple concept, which is well, it's a rational concept, the acknowledgement of objective reality, and he's standing a little too close to it, so he's falling victim to the concept of infinite regress. How do I know that I know? How do I know that I know that I know? How do I know that I know that I know that I know? That's absurd. It's not necessarily wrong to pursue a line of questioning like that, which is the pursuit of ultimate knowledge. But he doesn't have to go that far. We can just stop at the first question. How do I know that I know? How do I know what I don't know? I know because I know. That's the answer.
Okay, but
don't have to go further than that.
See, as Christians, we say we know because God has said. But that's unacceptable to you. But yet, for some reason, it's acceptable just to say, well, I know because I know.
Well,
see, on the one hand,
I don't think that either is acceptable or unacceptable. Again, I think that it's not necessary to complicate things, except if you are a person who operates on faith. And I think that that's one of the pitfalls of faith. One ends up complicating things that aren't complicated at all, at least not at the level I'm speaking at, which is objective reality. I know that I have 4 fingers and a thumb. How do I know that I know? Now, that's an interesting question. It's one that we ought to explore, but we shouldn't put aside the first objective observation. I do have 4 fingers and a thumb. I know because I use them all the time. So I'm not making a positive assertion that I don't know that there's a God. In fact, atheists try to prove a negative, which is far more difficult to do. Atheists say there is no God. How do you prove a negative?
Well, it seems to me that you're running the same course when you say that it's impossible to prove that there is a God. I mean, how can you make that assertion unless you've examined? Well, you said that you believe that it's impossible to either confirm or deny the proof or the existence of God based on evidence.
And I didn't quite say that either.
Okay, maybe
I
misunderstood you.
Is that it's not possible for us as human beings to do that.
But how would you know unless you've examined every piece of evidence that lies in the universe?
Well, thank you for agreeing with me.
I'm not agreeing with you. I'm saying
you just stated my point.
Well, the one who has examined every piece of evidence in the universe has told me, and therefore I would strongly disagree with you.
Well, of course you have to, because you're a person of faith. Now, let's say that you didn't believe in God, but that you believed in the Great Pumpkin. And you were to say, the Great Pumpkin has told me that the ultimate reality is one that I don't have to investigate, that I don't have to doubt, because I know the Great Pumpkin told me. He told me in his writings, right? Now,
well, I'm not aware of any writings that are by the Great Pumpkin.
Well,
and I'm not aware that
speaking hypothetically.
I'm not. Well, see, hypotheticals don't work.
Of course, I'm using Linus as an example.
Okay, but see, hypotheticals don't work. Hypotheticals don't work by way of analogy because they're hypothetical.
Well, if I don't get a chance to finish my hypothetical, Pastor, it won't work.
I'm sorry. I thought you were
Let me just pursue this.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to be combative. I'm actually trying to present what I think is an escape hatch for Justin, so that he can get out of that infinite regress and escape the reductio ad absurdum that he seems trapped in. So I'm simply making the point that as an agnostic, I acknowledge that you are perfectly justified to make the claims that you do, Pastor, based on faith. Because to have a religious belief requires only one thing: internal consistency. If your belief is consistent with itself, it's justified. You have an ultimate arbiter of reality, what you call the divinely inspired text. That is sort of like your generative source. The beliefs that you hold are generated by that text, and you can always refer back to it and to your interpretation of it to justify the things you say. It would not be rational for me to object to your doing that. I would only object to the extent that you inflict pain or suffering on me. And there are many Christians who do not inflict pain and suffering. For instance, the civil rights movement was supported by Christians. There are many humane movements, humane developments in history and culture that are the result of of religious belief. I support those things. I only want to object to religious belief to the extent that it is imposed on me. I choose not to believe in the Great Pumpkin, and I choose not to believe in the existence of God.
Okay, and that's fine. But when you say...
Yes, and you see, you're required to say that it's fine. You must say that it's fine.
No,
You must try to save my soul, yes.
No, I didn't
But
say...
you have
I didn't
to
say...
also accept what I claim I want to believe or disbelieve in.
No,
because you're a humane man.
Well, I take it one step further. I come
Yeah.
from the Reformed tradition, so I not only have to accept what you believe, but I recognize that whatever it is that you believe is ordained by God. And so I'm not even going to say that the burden of saving your soul lies on my shoulders. But here's the thing. When you say, namely, that you can't know something, you're making you're claiming a universal negative statement.
No, I'm not.
When you say it's impossible to know something, that is a universal negative statement.
No, it isn't.
Well,
Do you see why it isn't?
no, I don't.
Well, I used to teach logic. The thing about logic is that it comes in two forms, symbolic and non-symbolic. Symbolic logic can lead us to a position of insanity, and logicians warn us of this, as a matter of fact. They say, and this is the reason that logic is divided up into two forms, deductive and inductive logic. Deductive logic can lead to a type of madness. You can generate little boxes that you can't get out of with deductive logic. Inductive logic, unlike deductive logic, is not based on a finite set of rules that you generate larger rules from. Inductive logic is open-ended.
Yes, it is. You're right.
I'm being
But see,
inductive,
if I want to learn about an automobile,
yes.
would I gain more knowledge by deconstructing an automobile or starting out with a garage full of automobile parts and putting them together?
Why do you pose that question in the terms of greater or lesser knowledge?
Because that's what we're discussing tonight, greater or lesser
That's not
knowledge.
what I'm discussing.
Well, I'm saying that we can know for sure.
Yes.
And you're saying that we can't know for sure. I'm saying
Yes.
that deductively we can know. And you're saying that you
Well, of
prefer
course,
the
you're a
inductive
deductive
method.
thinker. You believe that there's a finite set of rules, the Bible, and your interpretation of it, that generates all the other knowledge that you need to have. I disagree with that.
Okay, but when you talk about when you talk about logic, is logic the axiom for your rationality?
No, not at all. Logic is simply a tool. It would be wrong to think that a hammer is a really good tool to use to turn a screw.
Do I have to use...
Screwdriver is.
Okay. Am I obligated or am I somehow constrained to use your tools?
No, not at all. And in
then
fact,
why do you
I
point
wouldn't
out...
want to live in a universe in which you would be constrained.
Then if logic is your tool, why do you point out, why do you take the time to point out that I haven't reasoned logically
now,
in
you
understanding
see, you
your
did
question?
it again. You said, if logic is my tool.
Right. We're getting some, I don't know where that's
I think that
coming
interference is coming from your end, Pastor.
from. Yeah, I'm not sure how that is.
Yeah, there's a chip in my phone that prevents radio intrusion.
Okay, let me just tell my son, hey, Noah, are you doing anything on that computer over there? Okay, good. Noah, I need you to go in the house and tell them if they're using a radio upstairs or something to turn it off, okay? I want to understand you correctly, so it's important for me to get this, because I don't want to misinterpret what you say and then miss your whole position altogether.
Yes.
When you say that basically when I said that you are denying, or that you are, what did I say just a moment ago? I said that you are making you're claiming a universal negative.
Yes.
By a universal negative statement by saying that it's impossible to know that God exists.
Yes.
And you say,
but you see, that's a language trap.
But you say that
you're falling into the pitfalls of deductive logic.
Okay, but
where reality is constructed and restrained through language. That's only contradictory in terms of language.
But once again,
not contradictory in terms of experience.
Okay, once again, when you make the statement, you're falling into the pitfall of deductive reasoning.
Yes.
why are you impressing upon me your tool? In other words, why are you saying you
but again,
must use my tool?
You keep saying that. I didn't say that logic was my tool. I said logic is a tool.
Okay.
It's only one.
Okay, so why do I have to use one of your tools?
You don't. I think the problem doesn't lie with you, Pastor, but with Justin. I don't hear you using reductio ad absurdum. I don't hear you falling into infinite regress. And in fact, many religious people don't. They're simply deductive.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with deduction.
But
I feel perfectly comfortable with it.
Okay.
I just simply, when I choose to, step outside of it.
okay. All right, we've got some other callers that are waiting patiently, and we're running out of time. So let me go to our next caller. Let's go to Gabe calling from Utah. Gabe, welcome to the Atheist Hour.
Hello?
You're on.
I can barely hear either of you. And you know what, Gene?
What's that?
When Justin was on, I could barely hear Professor Ray, too. So I don't know what's going on, but I got my earphone in, and I've got the volume all the way turned up. So can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say a few things. Obviously, I've been on the phone for a while, so my original point, you've kind of brought different things up, but great pumpkin analogies just don't cut it. I mean, quite honestly, when we're talking about whether or not the great pumpkin exists, we're not talking about the originator and the sustainer of the universe. So that's a false analogy that Professor Ray has introduced into this, and it's a red herring. And the other thing I wanted to say is I'm also a teacher of logic, and Justin did not do the fallacy that he is claiming he did, the reductio ad absurdum, or an infinite regression fallacy. He's just completely wrong about that. All Justin was trying to do was show that his belief in senses or logic or whatever, they don't justify themselves. We can, as Christians, justify those things, and we believe that God is an ultimate presupposition
because you're misrepresenting
for our avenues of knowledge, such as logic, ethics,
you're misrepresenting me.
And other avenues
I don't have
of epistemology.
To accept the conceptualization that you force
okay,
upon
hold on
me.
a second, guys. I think what the problem is here is that Gabe is having trouble hearing you, Professor. And so when you were trying to jump into the conversation there, he wasn't hearing you. So, Gabe, if you can
basically distinguish between right and wrong, and that men are morally accountable for their wrong actions.
Okay,
I want to
Gabe,
know on your worldview how you account for those things.
Gabe,
there's so many things wrong with that question that I think I'll just skip over them, and I'll point out that I'm not talking about my worldview. I'm talking about a worldview. I'll start there, and I'll say, one does not need to have a religious belief to have morality. Why do you claim that one does?
Well, hey, I didn't say that one needed to exercise morality. I said one needs to have one to justify morality. I'm not asking whether or not you're a moral person. I want you to justify your morality and why
does one need religious belief to justify a moral system or a moral code?
Well, because if you don't have the Bible as your objective standard, then morality reduces to subjectivism. And
how about the Bhagavad Gita?
Every man, well, there's no moral code in the Bhagavad Gita.
Well, then we need to evaluate the Bhagavad Gita and show that its system can't account for reality either. But
or the Quran.
Well, the Quran.
You're dealing with the Christian system.
Or
and
the Quran.
If Christianity is true, if God does exist,
okay, I'm not going to accept
in His Word what's right and what's wrong.
I'm not going to accept Christian
for
intolerance.
having an ethical system.
I'm not going to accept Christian intolerance.
How you justify or how you
I'm not going to accept Christian intolerance dressed up as rational discourse.
Okay, Gabe.
Well, making a claim doesn't solve it. I mean, you can poke fun
what
at
do you want to ask?
You're just dressing it up. Well, answer the question. I mean, if it's so ridiculous,
please rephrase the question.
Really
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Answer. Go ahead, answer it.
Please rephrase the question. I'm not sure what you're asking me.
I can barely hear him.
Okay, what he's asking is if you can put the question in a nutshell form so that he can answer the question.
I want to know on his. I want him to give me a sufficient worldview in which he can justify.
Okay, he's going to have to stop prescribing me in the process of asking his question. I can't answer his question if it's loaded.
Okay, but you have a worldview. Everybody has a worldview.
No, I don't have a worldview.
Oh, come on, Professor.
Se.
Everybody has a worldview whereby they judge all other beliefs.
How do you prove a claim like that?
Well, it just the same way you do. It's self-evident.
It's self-evident.
Well,
you think that's how I'm proving the claims that I'm
when Dustin
making?
asked you earlier, how do you
I
know?
am
What
not
did
a
you
Christian.
say? When Dustin
I am
asked you
not
earlier,
a Christian.
I understand that. But when Dustin
Okay.
asked you earlier, how do you know? You said, I just know.
Okay, now, because I'm not a Christian, I do not involve myself in arguments over morality. I do not have a moral code. I have an ethical code. An ethical code is a system of beliefs, and I will use the word belief, about the nature of right and wrong action that is not based on religious belief or a deity.
Okay, but once again, if it's just an ethical code, it automatically
Why
reduces...
do you say just an ethical code?
Okay, because I'm using...
Because you're a Christian.
Okay, if it's an ethical code, I didn't use it.
Yeah.
I didn't need to use the word just, but
Yes,
if
but
it's
we'll
if
call
it's
it
an
a sort of
ethical
Freudian
code,
slip, Pastor.
if it doesn't make any difference. Here's my point: if it's an ethical code,
I'm claiming it does make a difference.
well, now you're not letting me finish my statement. If it's an ethical code that's
Yes.
not rooted in an objective standard such as God's word, the Bible,
I didn't say that.
then
It is rooted in an objective standard, not God's word.
what's the objective standard then?
Human culture and history.
Well, human culture varies from culture to culture.
Yes, it does, and thank goodness it does.
So then, culturally, ethics are subjective.
You see, but you're thinking I'm talking about morality. I'm not. I'm talking about ethics. Ethics varies from culture to culture. Precise or particular ethical practices vary from culture to culture, from time period to time period. But what is distinctive about ethics is it is always a conception of right and wrong action. It's flexible. It changes. It's not deductive. It's inductive.
So how can you say that? How can you give a definition for evil if, according to your worldview, evil is always changing?
You see, again, I'm going to have to object. I don't accept the conceptualizations that you're forcing on me. You keep using the term worldview in a way that I feel uncomfortable.
Are you denying that there's a certain way in which Professor Ray Wallard views the world?
Now, why is that an important question to even ask?
Why is it important question? Why is it an important issue to say that it doesn't exist? I mean, every time you use the word...
Why is that an important question to ask? I think it's important to be very precise about language.
It's an important question because I'm trying to demonstrate that you do have a worldview. And
yes, indeed. In other words, you have an assumption that you've already made that you're seeking to prove, and it's keeping you from being able to hear what I'm saying. That was the problem with the previous caller. In fact, unlike you, he was being very aggressively dominating. He was domineering. He was trying to impose his conceptions onto me. You're not doing that, but you are a person of faith, and you're a Christian.
But I'm not a fideist. I think that you're confusing faith with fideism.
Well,
I'm not a fideist. My faith is also built on evidences, and I would argue rational evidences.
And I would argue on your behalf. As I said earlier, I have nothing against belief in the Great Pumpkin. The only thing you require for your belief to be legitimate, and I allow you this, is that it be consistent. You appeal to the Bible for ultimate justification for your system of beliefs.
I do.
That does not give you the right to impose on me.
No, you're absolutely right.
Not just your system of belief, but the concept of belief as you understand it.
I'm not trying to impose anything. I'm trying to understand how, in your world, how you account for things like logic and ethics and things like common sense. I don't know how you could account for these things.
I don't know how you fail to see them.
No, I see them. I just don't know how you can account for them.
Then if you see them, why are you being so questioning?
Because I don't think that you can account for them.
But you see them.
Well, yeah, they're there because you're living in
then
God's world.
Why do you need to account for what you can see?
Well, I need to account for what I can see. I'm saying I'm viewing things from my worldview. I can see them from my worldview.
Thank you, Pastor.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering how, when you say I look at my hand and I see 5 fingers.
Yeah.
I'm wondering in Ray Waller's world, where do those 5 fingers come
Pastor,
from?
look at your hand right now.
I'm wondering where they come from.
Pastor,
I see 5.
Look at your hand right now.
I'm looking at it.
Do you see 5 fingers?
I see 5 fingers.
Do you see a thumb?
I do.
It's not Ray Waller's world then, is it?
No, we live in the same world.
Yes.
But the difference is, in your world, you can't account for where this hand came from.
I don't need to, Pastor.
Well,
that was the problem that Justin had.
Okay.
It was the problem of infinite regress.
Okay. Well, that helps me now, because you're basically saying it doesn't matter where it comes from.
No, unless I happen to be curious about it. It's possible to carry out investigations about the source of forms. It's called the problem of forms in philosophy. Where did the original thing come from? Now, I'll ask you, Pastor, where did God come from?
God has always existed.
So he had no origin.
That's right.
Or she had no origin.
He had no origin.
No origin.
He's infinite and he's eternal.
Okay.
And the
how do
scriptures
you
declare
justify the belief in something that had no beginning, has no end, was just always there?
How do I justify the belief?
Yes.
Because the one that possesses those attributes has spoken. And
there
not only
that,
but he's a precondition for morality and logic.
There you go. That's your belief.
And he's a precondition.
I don't share that belief.
And he's a precondition for my hand. But see, there's a difference between saying I have a consistent worldview, and don't bother me with the details. When I ask you where the hand comes from, essentially what you're saying is those are details that I'm not concerned with.
Yes, nor do I need to be.
So when you say that a worldview only makes sense if it's internally consistent, and then I ask you,
I didn't say that.
Or a belief system.
Only. I don't use the term worldview.
Okay, a belief system.
You're using that term.
Okay, well,
what I said, again, was that all you need in order to have a religious belief is consistency, internal consistency.
Okay, do you have internal... You're talking only about religious beliefs?
Yes.
Okay, so internal consistency is not something that is necessary.
Now, you know what you're doing, Pastor, is you're yearning towards induction, but you're trapped in a deductive worldview, to use your term.
I'm simply trying to understand where you're coming from.
You're asking questions that can only be answered inductively, but you bar yourself from induction.
Well, we all have our presuppositions.
You're inside a system of beliefs that is deductive.
We're both inside of a system of beliefs. And so just as
but mine's not deductive.
Well, nevertheless you bar yourselves from the possibility of God by your presupposition that God can't be proven.
No, I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic.
No,
I'm not barring myself from anything.
I didn't say you were an atheist. I said you said that God is unprovable.
You said that I bar myself.
Yeah, that's because you said I'm barring myself. I'm saying
you're barring yourself because you're a believer. I'm not.
No.
A Christian is a believer. An atheist is a believer. I'm not a believer.
Well, you're believing in something. You're believing that when you say
I believe that my hand has 5 fingers and a thumb.
So would you classify yourself as a materialist?
Well, let me tell you this. If God were to appear before me, for instance, if I had been one of the original 12 apostles, I had seen Jesus raise himself from the dead, appear before me, allow me to inspect his wounds, and I then saw him ascend into heaven, that would be objective evidence to assume not that there necessarily is a God, but that there is a being who is capable of doing things that I'm not and has some sort of higher power. I might be inclined to believe that higher power is God.
Okay. Well, Professor Waller, I've enjoyed talking to you, but we are out of time. It is 6 o'clock on the West Coast here.
It's been exciting.
Yeah, it has. I think it's been a lively discussion. Just when we're starting to, I think, understand where one another is coming from, the time has run out. I do have another program that's scheduled to begin in just a few moments, so I need to let you go. But I appreciate you coming on the show, and I would like to have you on sometime in the future if we can continue this conversation.
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay.
I think that you're basically a good and just man, Pastor. I can tell.
Well, I appreciate that, and I have no reason to think otherwise of you, even though we don't share the same worldview.
And that's rational of you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. Just in a few minutes, we're going to have the Narrow Mind program. It's going to take about probably 3 or 4 minutes, and I'd like you to bear with me. Those of you that are hanging on, the callers, Arthur calling from Mountain View, we'll be with you in just a moment if you can wait. And we're going to have open phones on the Narrow Mind. So our phone number once again is 1-800-466-1873.